Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for another Omega Insight. I'd like to continue on with the topic of the series, Tools for Your Toolbox. As you know, I've been selecting poems throughout the years that I've had either committed to memory or been given as a tool to use, whether reciting it in the classroom or implementing it in my own life. Tonight's poem, A Splendid Torch, is by George Bernard Shaw. This one is one of George Addair's, the founder of Omega. This is one of his favorite. It's a short, precise, and to the point. And I actually began to adapt using this as part of my mantra, let's say, or morning routine where I would recite this every morning as well as a guideline for how I wanted to present myself when I interact with individuals. So a bit about George Bernard Shaw. He was an Irish playwright in the late 1890s, 1870s, I think. He revolutionized comedic drama. His play, The Pygmalion, was later adapted into a Broadway musical, My Fair Lady. And in this poem, The Splendid Torch, Shaw defines the purpose of life and instills the idea of becoming the journey. And as I said, this is one of George Addair's favorite poems because that's what George was. He really exemplified this poem. He was the journey. Anybody who knew George always knew he talked about the work that he does. It never was about him. It was always about making a contribution. There's a story I typically tell. I happened to be in the recovery room from George when he was recovering from hip surgery. And when he woke up from the anesthesia, he looked around the room and he looked at the nurses and the attendants and visiting and other patients. And he looked around and then he looked directly at me and he said, "I have to make a contribution to the citizens of this community." And then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. Even if it was a drug-induced statement, that just was George. He always was thinking about making a contribution. And he instilled that. I mean, that's one of the things that I feel he instilled in us when he was training us, the facilitators, to continue making a contribution. And it really does tie back to this poem, The Splendid Torch, by George Bernard Shaw. So the first sentence says, "This is the true joy in life, the being, used for a purpose, recognized by ourselves as a mighty one." So I recognize that I have strength and I wish to be used. So this being, that's the joy of life, is having a purpose. The joy in life is having a purpose, which everyone who has a purpose knows that. When you have a purpose, you feel fulfilled. Continuing on, the force of nature, so recognizing that I'm a mighty one, this being a force of nature, instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Again, the idea is I'm not going to sit and complain, why can't I have this, why can't I have that, this never works, that doesn't have anything to do with that. What I recognize is that I am here to make a purpose, that it's not about, life's not going to make me happy. I'm here to make the contribution. He continues on to say, "I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do whatever I can." Now, of course, I mentioned the story with George Addair and making a contribution to the citizens of that community. But I want to draw the attention to here that it is my privilege to do whatever I can. You notice he didn't say, I'm waiting for the accolades, or I want to get paid, or I want the recognition, or it's all about the ego. None of that. He says privilege. Privilege. I think privilege and honor go together. It's my honor to make a contribution, that I have an ability to do whatever I can to make this contribution. George Bernard continues on, "I want to be thoroughly used up before I die. Thoroughly used up before I die. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake." We do not know the plan of the universe, do not know why I'm here, what I will do when I'm gone, where I came from. What I do know is I'm here right now. And when I am making a contribution to others, I feel fulfilled. I feel brighter, lighter. Everyone understands this. When we go out of our way to assist others, or charitable contributions, everybody who's ever volunteered a contribution, you understand that. When you're a volunteer or you make a contribution, you feel Your soul feels connected to what you're giving your life to. So we want to be used up before I die. I completely agree on this one. Why would I hold anything back? Give everything I have. Give it because I can. Give it because I can. Love doesn't cost us anything. Love because I can. I don't have to hold that back. Have compassion because I can. Understanding because I can. All of the attributes that we talk about in Omega, simply because I can. Because I want to be used up before I pass on. And the final stanza says, life is no brief candle for me. It is sort of a splendid torch, which I've got hold of for a moment. And I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. I love that idea. If you think about it, our lifespan is a fleeting moment in the history of humanity. It's a fleeting moment. A couple decades, maybe. That's it. That's it. Some of us make it to a century, but it's a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things. So if I understand that, and I understand that I have my life right now, my job would be to make this burn as brilliantly so that I can pass it on to the next generation. In other words, making that contribution for the next generation so that they can continue on. We often talk about the idea of a green environment and what kind of world are we leaving for our children, the concept that we're responsible for the next generation, which we are. We are responsible for this next generation. So what are we doing with our lives for the next generation? And again, I'm not just speaking about physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. What are we doing for the next generation? So again, as I said, this was one of George's favorite pieces. I've adapted to it. It is one of my favorite pieces as well. And so much so that I used to call this poem Life is Like a Candle, but it's not. It's called The Splendid Torch. But the last line, again, I really resonate the idea of burning as brilliantly as I can before I pass it on to next generations. I feel like that is an honor to be able to do that. So thank you for joining me as we delve into this poem. And I look forward to sharing with you next week our final series in the Tools for Your Toolbox. So until then, have a wonderful evening. Bye now.